What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Light and Lamp podcast. I am here with Steve.
Hello.
As always, and today's going to be a bit of a hybrid episode. We're going to be doing, to start, we're just going to be talking about some of the wrap-ups of the play-in series, maybe talking about some of the playoffs that actually start tomorrow, and then we're also going to be doing a live reaction to the NHL Draft Lottery. So all the teams that got eliminated, everybody has a 12.5% chance at one Mr. Alexis Lafreniere. So,
or I guess the idea of Alexis Lafreniere,
yeah.
like,
which we will get into. You know, some teams could potentially be trading this pick, but
probably after like the actual pick is announced, we'll talk about it because then it's like we know kind of where it shakes up.
Yeah, so I guess just to kind of wrap up some of the play-in series, like there was really no surprises. The only series that went 5 games was Toronto-Columbus. All the other series, whoever was ahead at the time of our last recording ended up winning. So, I mean, we'll go through some of them. So, you know, like the Montreal Canadiens knocking off the Pittsburgh Penguins in 4 games.
I mean, that is the talk of the hockey world right now.
What does this mean for Pittsburgh? Is the window closed, or is it closing? What does this mean for them?
Crosby, in his exit interview, said that like their window might be closing himself. So, I mean, if Sidney Crosby sees it, I think the rest of the league sees it, but that being said, I mean, I don't expect the Pittsburgh Penguins to be, bottom feeders anytime soon. I still think they'll be a playoff team. So, I mean, it definitely is there's some thought to be put into this offseason by Jim Rutherford going forward to really figure out how to get the best out of this team and really maximize Sidney Crosby's last, 4 or 5 years of competitiveness without tearing it all down.
Well, I guess the operative question is, where's the hole in this roster? Really the only thing I can particularly think of is that, to me, the defense is just kind of okay. It's not, like, super impressive.
I don't really think they have, like, a top matchup guy, to be honest with you. And I guess the real operative thing, not the operative question, but, one of the big questions is, do you keep Tristan Jarry after he pretty much stole the show from Matt Murray? Or or vice versa, right? Do you keep both of them or one of them? It's kind of the same question as the Rangers, because next season, at the end of the off season, is the expansion draft, and you could in theory expose Matt Murray to the expansion draft and not really have to worry about doing anything else or taking anybody on. But I think the real question is, would you rather trade him or Tristan Jarry now and add something to your roster for next season, like, a matchup defenseman, or even just cap space, like weaponizing some cap space here and there?
Is Pittsburgh going to expose a second straight big-name goalie in the expansion draft? I mean, they could, right?
I don't think they really have a choice, right? Because you can't protect both of them.
You go from Fleury to
Murray.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, you probably wouldn't really have to pay Seattle all that much to take Matt Murray. You might not even have to pay them anything.
Oh, no, a 2-time Stanley Cup champion just fell in our lap. I mean, he's not an elite goaltender. I don't think he's going to go out to Seattle. Like, if he does get picked in the expansion draft, or, whatever Pittsburgh does with Matt Murray, I don't think it's going to be, like, the Marc-Andre Fleury situation where he goes out there and he's now, like, world beater, champion of the Western Conference, because I don't think Matt Murray's of the same caliber as Marc-Andre Fleury. I just think that's a kind of an inherent fact at this point, even though Murray stole his job from him. But I think that was more a management decision than any indictment on how Fleury was actually playing at the time.
Let me ask you this: if because there are some teams that really could use a legitimate starting goalie. I think chief among them being the Buffalo Sabres.
The Detroit Red Wings.
I could honestly, depending on how these playoffs shake out, if Mac does indeed take a smaller contract, I could see Colorado coming and asking, try to fix really the only hole in that entire roster.
Yeah, I think. See, I don't know if Matt Murray would be the answer there, because I think in order to be they're already a Stanley Cup contender, right? But to make them essentially the odds-on favorite to win a Stanley Cup in the coming years, they'd really have to add an elite goaltender. And I mean, Matt Murray can play like an elite goaltender. You saw it when he carried the Penguins to back-to-back cups. But then,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, just since then, Matt Murray's been kind of okay. And if anything, I think they'd take a chance on Braden Holtby first, because Holtby's proven not that Matt Murray isn't a proven winner, but Matt Murray's also got the regular season track record outside of this year to back up the fact that like he can win you games in the regular season, and then when the chips are down, he's even better.
I think Matt Murray might be worth looking at them because he might just be their version of Corey Crawford.
He's also cheaper.
Yeah, with a roster, like, the roster is good enough to win a Stanley Cup. So, like, they could win the Stanley Cup this year and it wouldn't surprise me. Even with Philip Grubauer. And this is not to say Philip Grubauer is a bad goalie by any stretch. He just hasn't really proved to us yet that's, like, he's the guy. You know, he's going to be the one to take them to the Stanley Cup because he really hasn't done it yet. Right?
But, like, I mean, he has one good playoff run this year, and, you know, the confidence changes. Like, the whole narrative shifts to, okay, we have our guy, and then there really aren't a lot of holes in that roster, so... But I think...
I could see him go and trade... Do you think that Pittsburgh might be willing to trade Matt Murray to Buffalo and just take some draft picks back in the hopes that Buffalo's just as bad as they always are?
Here's a spicy one. Do you think they take on Rasmus Ristolainen?
I don't think Buffalo would trade Rasmus Ristolainen.
He's been on the market. There's been rumors that have been floated around. They don't want to pay him the money they're paying him, and especially not when they have Rasmus Dahlin to pretty much take his job from him. It's essentially like, oh no, we have two big, strong European defensemen. You know,
they would need a defenseman back in that trade.
Well, could you give him a guy like maybe Brian Dumoulin?
Justin Schultz.
Justin Schultz. I mean, I think Dumoulin would be a better fit because Buffalo's biggest issue is keeping the puck out of the net, not necessarily scoring. Yeah. So I think a guy like Dumoulin would be a nice pickup just because, you know, he's a stabilizing force. Again, 2-time Stanley Cup champion. He's been there. He's done that.
It's definitely interesting. I mean, I think I'm not really sure that Buffalo is in the market right now for addition by subtraction. I think that they're just trying to add.
Yeah.
And I think if you take Ristolainen on that deal, you're definitely not getting Ristolainen and a first for Matt Murray.
No.
So I guess it's really up to Pittsburgh's like discretion.
What does Pittsburgh really want?
Think it's worth trading Murray for like a first, right? In the hopes that Buffalo is again not a playoff team and you get like a top 15 pick out of it.
I guess the real question is, what do the Pittsburgh Penguins want, right? Are they looking to retool now? Or are they looking to slowly like ease into like a rebuild, right? Start like stockpiling some draft picks here. And start drafting guys that are unknown quantities rather than trade for a player like Ristolainen, who's I think 25, and he's pretty much a known quantity. You know, he's a proven power play quarterback. I mean, he's not necessarily proven to be necessarily a matchup like the big matchup defenseman, but I think alongside Chris Letang, they could, you know, in theory, the pair could match up against top units and do an effective job because neither Ristolainen nor Chris Letang are necessarily the strongest defenders in the National Hockey League, but I just think like their combined strength, they could like Voltron it essentially, you know, because then you can have
our powers combined.
Yeah, because then you can have Sidney Crosby, because Sidney Crosby takes all the tough matchup minutes as it is.
Right.
So you wouldn't really have to worry about, you know, him like shutting down the center iceman because you have Crosby to do that. You really have to worry about the wingers, and I think Chris Letang and Ristolainen could, in theory, be sufficient enough or good enough together rather than having one big shutdown guy. You could have two guys who are honestly above average in their own end take on top units and be okay, especially when you have a set like a bona fide matchup center iceman.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting because, you know, like I said at the top, it's really a question of there's not really an obvious hole in the roster. So like if we take a look at somebody like the Edmonton Oilers, right, who again they also got knocked out of playoffs this year, there's an obvious hole in that roster in net, and there's an obvious hole in that roster on the back end. I think the forward group is good enough now. You have, obviously, McDavid, Draisaitl, and then they added some really nice additions, the depth scoring of Tyler Ennis, Anthony Ciu, James Neal, if he can get his act together ever. I think the forward core is good enough, right?
Right.
And they did address an issue of depth scoring this year by adding Tyler Ennis and Anthony Ciu at the deadline.
Well, they made themselves less of a helicopter, right? Like, their strength wasn't all in the middle of the ice. And not to say like Athanasiou or Tyler Ennis are, you know, 40 goal scorers, but you don't need 40 goal scorers. You're not looking to add elite players when you have the best player on earth and probably like either number 2 or number 3 with Leon Draisaitl.
Yeah, and really when you watched the series against Chicago, the issue wasn't we can't score. The issue was that
we couldn't keep the puck out of our net.
You were going shot for shot with the Blackhawks, and at the end of the day, you were not the one taking the last shot. And then the issue is there's an obvious hole in net. I don't think that anyone's confused at this point if Mike Smith or Mikko Koskinen are the answer.
I think Mike Smith's contract is up this year.
He is up this year.
So he's going to walk.
Mikko Koskinen, they're still locked into that contract for another 2 years. I don't think there's any question of is he the guy anymore, because the answer is no.
I mean, I think Mikko Koskinen's like, if anything, he's in that category of like an elite backup. Like, he's very good and can start you 20, 25 games and win you 15 of them if he has to. But when you're asking him to carry the load of like 55, 60 games, which is what the Edmonton Oilers are going to need him to do, because, Mike Smith isn't the guy anymore. I mean, he has been the guy since he left
Arizona.
I
mean, he was good in Calgary, but he wasn't good enough.
Yeah, that's kind of it. Lately he's been, I mean, he carried that Arizona Coyotes team to a conference final. But since then, he hasn't been the same. And that's to be expected. He's, 38 years old now? It's like Brian Elliott.
Yeah, and not for nothing, he wasn't getting any help from that defense either. I mean, Darnell Nurse is a good piece. I like Ethan Bear.
I like Clefbaum a lot.
Clefbaum's a good player, but the thing is, these guys are all just good players.
They're all like good middle. Like they're fine if you had a Victor Hedman on this roster, it'd be fine if that was the rest of your top four.
I was just gonna say they're really missing that one true, like the Hampus Lindholm or the Victor Hedman type defenseman. You don't need a guy like Erik Karlsson or Roman Josi, because you don't need to score anymore.
Right, and you have Clefbaum, who's a competent enough power play quarterback.
You need somebody who's going to keep the puck out of the net.
Right.
Now, here's a really interesting question. Do you think Matt Murray would be a good fit for the Edmonton Oilers?
I don't see why not. I see if they could squeak, like, again, they need a matchup defenseman, but they could squeak out like a guy. Like I keep saying it, but a guy like Brian Dumoulin. I don't think it'd be that awful of a fit, because Dumoulin would then stabilize the top four, and then you could have two pairings that could play like equal minutes against big matchups. Like, you really wouldn't be throwing anybody to the wolves, because you said Clefbaum is good, Darnell Nurse is good, Ethan Bear showed us this year that he's good and he can play. The real question is, like, do you want any of them matching up? And it's like, no, not really. But if you have Brian Dumoulin in there, and you can say, all right, well, we don't have to have a specific, like, I wouldn't be like, okay, I need Clefbaum matching up every single shift against, Mikko Rantanen and Nathan McKinnon, when I can have Dumoulin and Darnell Nurse and Oscar Clefbaum. So you don't get as many
right.
bad mismatches on the ice. It's not going to be as detrimental, which I think might be a little bit better for the Oilers if they can get a goaltender who can cover up a lot of mistakes, which Matt Murray, when he's playing well, can. Matt Murray is also like an above average goaltender when he's on.
But he's also an immediate upgrade over anything they have at their disposal.
Oh, 100%. And again, that relegates Mikko Koskinen to probably the most expensive backup in the league. But again, a guy that can play you 25 games and win you 15 of them, and you're in a better position now than they were. Because they were in the playoffs right before the season stopped, but they were getting chased. They were getting chased by teams like Vancouver, who are clearly much better.
Yeah.
And Calgary, who's also clearly much better, who managed to get their act together.
Yeah.
Do you think Matt Murray would be a good fit in Calgary? I know they have Big Save Dave, but
I don't really know what Calgary management thinks of David Riddick at this point, considering that Cam Talbot started all their games. Maybe they were just, doing the stereotypical run with the hot hand, and maybe Talbot looked better to them in training camp. Maybe there was something to that. I don't really know what their opinion on David Riddick is at this point.
Honestly, I don't know what my opinion on David Riddick is. I was really high on him, and because he had a good year last year, but granted, the team as a whole struggled this season, so it's not really fair to pin it all on Dave Riddick. But that being said, Dave Riddick also didn't really play that great this year.
I think Calgary's main issue right now is that there needs to be a replacement for some of the aging pieces. Like, obviously, we can see Mark Giordano meant a lot to this team when he was in Norris form last year, and the fact that he didn't have that form this year really set that whole defensive core back a step. And, I mean, outside of him, the defensive core is serviceable, but they didn't have Norris-type Giordano, so he needs to be replaced. They need to replace him. And the other thing is they need to figure out what's going on with the offense, because at times it looked really anemic. Really, the only noticeable player night in and night out was Matthew Tkachuk, because he's always physical and he's always noticeable. I mean, otherwise, even guys that I really like Sean Monahan, at some nights were just not noticeable.
We can't hide it, right? Like, they didn't win their first round series because they played better than the Winnipeg Jets. I mean, they did. don't get me wrong, you have to play better than a team to win a hockey game, right? In theory, unless you have Carey Price, then you can get shelled and Carey Price will hold you in a game until you get a squeaker, right? But they played better. But I still think like a healthy Winnipeg Jets would have been a much truer test of how good this team actually is, because it's not very hard to beat up a team that's defense is like 4 or 5 rookies and a goal. I mean, of course, they have a Vezina Trophy nominated goaltender, in my opinion, but they lose Mark Scheifele.
Well, you lose your number one center
and your scoring winger,
right winger. That's a tall task for any team to replace.
I mean, imagine the New York Rangers losing Mika Zibanejad and Artemi Panarin. It becomes almost insurmountable, and they already got clapped by the Carolina Hurricanes. They got beat up pretty bad. So I can't imagine having to try and do that because the Rangers' D-core is essentially the same as the Winnipeg Jets, right? A lot of rookies playing in positions that they aren't used to, but like we had Artemi Panarin and Mika Zibanejad. Without those two guys, it's like, ooh, okay, all right, maybe this isn't as good as it is. And
right.
To be fair, I think the Rangers have, like, just for the comparison, I think the Rangers in that case have a better like center depth to be able to try and keep up, whereas like the Winnipeg Jets lose Mark Scheifele and then Brian Little. I don't even think Brian Little's playing. I think he's still injured.
I mean, you have Cody Eakin, who's a good third line center, and Andrew Kopp, who's again a good third line center winger, but you're really without Mark Scheifele, your top 2 winger positions are incredibly thin.
I mean, yeah, because you have Andrew Kopp playing against Sean Monahan for 19 minutes a night, and that's just a mismatch no matter what.
And Kopp did well. I mean, he scored himself a couple big goals, but it wasn't
enough.
It's not Mark Scheifele.
No.
No, and there's a couple of teams who I think, obviously would like their matchups back. I mean, obviously, we talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs for the second straight year being out.
And what is essentially the first round.
Right. Or if you want to really, put the screw to them, they didn't even make the bracket.
They didn't make the playoffs, essentially.
And again, like there's an obvious hole in that roster in terms of actually, gritty depth forwards and defensemen that actually know how to defend.
I mean, I don't even think the hole on defense isn't even a hole; it's a crater. I mean, like there's outside of Morgan Riley, who's kind of standing on the edge of the crater, like, guys, I need some help. The team just keeps like pumping forwards into the lineup. And Jake Muzzin's a solid defensive defenseman. I'm assuming that they're going to re-up him, but otherwise, in a way, it's almost good for the Maple Leafs that they only have Morgan Riley under contract, because now you can essentially rebuild this defensive core. And I highly doubt Tyson Barrie's coming back. I don't even think, given the media treatment he got, he wants to sign with them again. I highly doubt Cody Cece's coming back. You have Travis Dermott, you have Justin Holl, but they're young and they're inexperienced. There's a lot of
question marks. And you're trying to win now because you haven't made the second round in how many years, and you're paying your top 4 forwards $40 million, and you got beat by a team whose entire forward core cost $35 million. It's not a good look.
I mean, the Maple Leafs are just... The Tyson Barrie thing is interesting because the media was really harsh to him, and wherever he goes for some reason, he never lives up to media hype, which I don't understand, because he was clearly their best offensive defenseman all season, and you could see him like the obvious chafing under Mike Babcock, right? Like he didn't play well the first couple of weeks or the first month or whatever it was before they replaced him with Sheldon Keefe. But like that whole team chafed under Mike Babcock. That whole team didn't look good. They didn't want to play for him, and when Sheldon Keefe took the roster over, there was, a noticeable uptick in his level of play. He was the number 1 power play quarterback. I think he scored like 40 points. Like, it's exactly what you expect out of Tyson Barrie.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. I don't really know what the media thought they were getting. Did they think they were going to get
Erik Karlsson?
A shutdown? Well, not even Erik Karlsson. Like, did they think they were going to get a shutdown defenseman? Because they were harping on his defensive ability, which granted is important. But when you really look at Tyson Barrie, the defenseman, I think his ideal role is a top 4 power play specialist. And asking him to do anything else is not being honest with who he is as a player.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's essentially just like you're putting a square peg in a round hole. It doesn't work.
You don't trade for Austin Matthews and expect him to win a Selke Trophy.
No.
So I don't know why they signed Tyson Barrie. And granted, at times, was he even like egregiously bad in his own zone? Sure. But the whole team is pretty much egregiously bad in their own zone.
The team is terrible in their own zone. That's why they lost. The other thing is that would scare me if I was the Maple Leafs was how easily that top six was shut down and pretty much nullified by the Columbus Blue Jackets in the games they won.
You got shut out in Game 5. You got shut out in an elimination game 2 nights after you staged a 3-goal comeback in 3 minutes.
And won the game in overtime.
You can't even find a single goal.
But that being said, that's also 3 nights after they blow a 3-0 lead in a period. A whole period. But like 3 minutes to stage a 3-goal comeback was huge. That's what you want that offense to be able to do. But they were bottled up and so easily in Game 5 that you could tell that there really didn't seem to be we talked about this before. There's like no passion on the bench. Like even Sheldon Keefe wasn't upset. He was kind of just standing there, like kind of just reinforcing the things to his guys, like, hey guys, come on. Whereas when Tortorella saw that the meltdown starting, Tortorella went off. Tortorella was angry, he was upset, and he fired his team up. And yeah, did they still lose the game? Of course. But in Game 5, they came out like world beaters, and they beat the Toronto. They shut down what is, in my opinion, probably the best top 6 in hockey. Or one of the best top 6s in hockey. And, I mean, Mitch Marner wasn't a factor. Austin Matthews was really the only one that was a factor all night, and that's just because his shot is so lethal. So he managed to find himself some space and get some shots, but he wasn't getting any help. And it doesn't help when John Tavares, your captain, the guy you're paying $11.5 million to come up big in a 1-0 hockey game, has a 6x4 opening and hits the post.
That was so bad.
He didn't even shank it either. He shot it right at the post. I know Seth Jones was kind of standing in his face, but like Jones wasn't even looking at the play. Jones didn't know where the puck was. So he's just standing there. John Tavares had time to stop the puck and shoot it. He didn't have to, and obviously I know you want to shoot it quick, but like still he could have dusted it off once and shot it and still had time to beat Seth Jones and the goaltender. But like when he needed him to come up big and he needed the big goal, he fired it off the post. And I think that says a lot of what you need to say about the Toronto Maple Leafs is they didn't come up when they needed to.
So speaking of the Toronto Maple Leafs, obviously they're one of the teams who's in play for this first round pick tonight. If you're the Toronto Maple Leafs and you get this pick, are you drafting Lafreniere? Are you trading down?
If I was the GM,
if you're Kyle Dubas, well, yeah, okay. If you're not Kyle Dubas, because we know what Kyle Dubas is probably going to do.
He's going to draft. Yeah, he's going to draft Lafreniere, and now you're going to have 5. Your top 6 is going to be even more disgusting. But what the Maple Leafs should do, and the pragmatic thing to do, would be what we've talked about before. When you asked me about what the Rangers should do if they get it right, which is trade it to a team who's looking to add scoring, a team in a rebuild that has some defensemen in a decent age range that they might want to move. Like you mentioned, Anaheim and Hampus Lindholm, or a guy like Cam Fowler. Like, they're at the age where they're looking to compete and win a Stanley Cup, and Anaheim's only at the very beginning of their rebuild, right? So it would make sense. Anaheim would be like, oh, great, we can add a young scoring forward, an elite level, like an S-tier prospect, right, to go with our other prospects, like guys like Sam Steele and Maxime Comtois, who are, let's be honest, both really good, but not to the same level as Alex Lafreniere.
No.
And you could sacrifice some defense because you're not really looking to win games. Like, let's be honest, Anaheim's looking to lose a lot of games and get a lot of high draft picks to rebuild, and that's the smart thing to do right now. It'd also be smart for them to try and weaponize cap space that way. They don't have a lot of it, but it'd still be a smarter move for them. And
just so you guys do know, I'm going to be turning the volume up on the TV, so if you hear some echo, I do apologize. But no, if I'm the Toronto Maple Leafs, I'm looking to trade down. I might not maybe drop out of the top 10.
Or the top 5, really.
But I think a perfect draft pick for them is Jamie Drysdale.
Yeah.
Big, like, he's a, and the thing is that's really annoying about Jamie Drysdale, not annoying about him, but it's like, he's a puck-moving defenseman. And the Toronto Maple Leafs do not need another puck-moving defenseman. But if you can draft somebody his size and round out his defensive game while he develops, he could be exactly what they need.
Which is a big puck-moving shutdown defenseman.
Have Lafreniere on the TV.
Okay,
Awkward.
I know we pointed it out the last time we did this strategy, but I think it's so, because again, Lafreniere is obviously at home, right? He's at his family's house.
You see the guy's reflection in the picture. It's his dad. His dad's probably just chilling.
And again, his family's obviously very proud of him. I would be very proud if I was his father, but the mural over his head is so funny to me every single time, because it's literally a mural of him winning all of his individual awards, his World Cup, his World Junior. And then there's Lafreniere just chilling with his own picture over his head.
So yeah, they could move down. They could trade. I think honestly, in a perfect world, they trade the first for Anaheim's first and like Hampus Lindholm.
Yeah.
Right, because Lindholm is 25, 26. Like he's starting to hit that age where he wants to compete, and Anaheim is probably a good 3 to 5 years away from competing again.
And Hampus Lindholm's shutdown ability is second to none.
And you get, you end up getting your sixth pick, right? If somebody takes Jamie Drysdale, you're still going to get a good pick. There's
another
draft.
defenseman in this draft that's ranked just behind Jamie Drysdale.
Yeah, and this is purported to be a very deep draft, so you're going to get a good player at 6. So it's really not the end of the world if you trade down, I don't think. I think a couple of teams would be willing to trade this draft pick. I mean, you could make the argument, if you wanted to. Of course you're going to take Lafreniere if you're the Leafs, because you can insert him into your top 6, and you can trade away somebody that's making money, and that gives you the cap relief, right?
Right.
And you have...
Well, who would that be guy that you'd trade? Would it be William Nylander? Because he's the name that keeps getting thrown around.
Which I still don't understand, because his contract is good enough to keep him.
He's the most friendly contract. I really think John Tavares is the problem.
He's the odd man out.
Because, again, if you trade John Tavares, right, just if you're the Maple Leafs, we'll do a little thought experiment here, right? It opens up a whole world of possibilities to you because you can move guys around now. You could move Kerfoot up into that second-line center role.
Or a guy like that should have been playing second line for the longest time is Kasperi Kapanen. Right.
You can move Kasperi Kapanen onto the second-line wing because you free up that extra spot. Like, there's movement, and Zach Hyman can come out of the top 6, There's movement to be had, whereas John Tavares really makes things super, super rigid, and he's stuck there, and he's, 29, 30 now?
Yeah, and the thing is, it's not like you don't have other centers. Austin Matthews can play center perfectly fine. You still have guys like Alex Kerfoot. You can bring in Lafreniere. You can play second-line center if you want. So the argument there is that you trade away someone with salary and you stick Lafreniere in the lineup and you get 3 years at his rookie contract, and that saves you a ton of money, which is a fair argument. I just think the problem is at that point you just traded your Toyota Camry for like a Prius. Like you traded you're trading away a scoring winger to insert a scoring winger, and you still didn't fix your defensive problems.
Yeah.
So I really think if you're the Leafs. If you're the Leafs, I think if you're the Penguins, I think if you're the Rangers, I think you seriously consider trading this pick, because none of those teams really need scoring wingers anymore, and they all really need, like you said, defensive help.
Did you see that move in the highlight reel?
Yeah.
Skating backwards, through the legs move, over a defenseman? That's disgusting. Anyway, but so real quick, the other defensemen that are ranked in the top 10 are Jamie Drysdale, like we said, but then there's Jake Sanderson, Caden Gould, and Braden Schneider. The one I've heard a lot about is Jake Sanderson. I've heard a lot of good things about him, but he's not obviously the same size as a guy Jamie Drysdale's not that big. Sanderson's bigger, but I don't think he has the same upside as Jamie Drysdale. Jamie Drysdale is very clearly the workhorse of this draft. He's been in the top 5, or if not the top 3, midterm rankings or discussion since last draft.
Yeah, and the thing is, like I said, I think the Rangers are another team that could do that, because again, the Rangers don't really need scoring. The Penguins don't really need scoring. A lot of these teams just need help on the back end, and if Lafreniere is going first, and then there's a couple of forwards in there, put them in any order you want. Really, because we've been told, this is a very deep draft. You could get Jamie Drysdale at a 5th or 6th pick, right? And again, even if you don't get him, there's a couple other defensemen in the top 10, or if you want to take the best available player and it's a forward, well, you're probably going to get a pretty good forward.
I mean, yeah, you'll probably get a guy like Marco Rossi, or Noel Gunler, or
guys Lucas Raymond, Timothy Stützle, Alexander Holtz,
And again, then you're still so you wouldn't be you'd be losing out on the best scoring player, but you still get a really elite level scoring player out of this. So it's really you didn't get your Bentley, but you still got a Ferrari. You can't really complain.
Here's a team that I think is in an interesting spot that really could either draft the player or trade the pick away. what do you do if you're the Nashville Predators and you win this?
I think the Predators have to draft him. They need so much help up front. Like, they need somebody that's going to be the guy after how many years of searching for the guy. Like we talked about in the last podcast. I mean, it's like Ryan Johansson's going to be the guy. Flames out. High-end second-line center. That's fine.
Kyle Turris.
He's the
guy.
He flamed out. You know. Then there's, outside of Kyle Turris, then there's Matt Duchene. It's going to be the guy. And listen, if you want to run 3 number 2 centers down the middle, that's perfectly fine. But at that point, you need an elite winger. You need somebody who's going to put the puck in the way. You need somebody who's going to put that puck in the net. And Lafreniere might be that guy for them. I mean, they also have Eeli Tolvanen in the system, and that, you know, you add Eeli Tolvanen and Alexei Lafreniere to that roster at any point in the next couple of years, with a back end that hopefully stays largely intact with, you know, Ryan Ellis and Matthias Ekholm and Roman Josi, and you got yourself a good team. You got yourself honestly a pretty good team. It's not going to win the Central Division because you have the Colorado Avalanche, the Dallas Stars, and the St. Louis Blues still in the division.
Right.
But
I think you'll be in a better place.
Here's an interesting thought. Is Alex Pietrangelo on the market, and would that first overall pick be enough to pry him out of St. Louis? Remember, we've been hearing. Remember, Pietrangelo's contract is up this year. Does St. Louis have the cap space to sign him? He's going to want 9.
I don't know. I don't think it would be enough on its own. You might have to do like a 3-team trade because St. Louis is going to need to replace him, and you're not going to replace 1-for-1 Alex Pietrangelo. But they're going to need to, you know, ship in a top 4/top 2 defenseman, because your top 2 can probably honestly be Colton Parayko and I'm gonna say Bouwmeester. We don't know if Bouwmeester's gonna play ever again, but
right.
You know, Colton Parayko is good enough that he can take over top 2 duties at this point. But they're gonna need a defenseman to fill that hole. So you could orchestrate a 3-team trade, or if you have a defenseman that's maybe like a mid, like top 4 kind of guy, like, you know, you're really looking to get, like you said, like a Brian Dumoulin or somebody like, you know,
Esa Lindell.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of some other names. Like, who's on the market that really could be going to those teams? I mean,
the Islanders have a glut at defense. They have guys that they could probably move, but they probably wouldn't be willing to. But
well, I'm thinking like the teams that are up for this first round pick. Well, I don't know. I mean, the thing is, like, there's a lot of teams that are up for this first round pick that have top 2 defensemen that probably could go.
Okay, why is the Florida Panther GM, which is the interim GM, just in a white room?
It's a default Zoom meeting background.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
I was like, why is this man just in a white room? But I mean, it's just an interesting thought because Pietrangelo hits the market, right?
I think if you give them the first overall pick and like a mid-tier, like top 4 shutdown defenseman to replace the defense that Alex Pietrangelo brings, you can probably get St. Louis's first back. So Pietrangelo in their first for, I don't even know if they had their first, but Pietrangelo in like their first, or maybe like a second for your first and like a mid-tier, you know,
defenseman.
I think the thing is you would have to get a guarantee from Pietrangelo's camp that he's going to sign. Obviously, you're not just going to trade for UFA and then have him not sign.
Right.
You'd have to get something like what Lou got with Pajot, where it was like we traded for him and then like a day later he was under contract.
He signed the same day. He
Yeah.
came to New York and signed. But
So,
I mean, there's some
it could
level of-
happen.
I mean, you really get into some weird gray areas there because the league doesn't want teams talking to players that are pending UFAs because it can be considered tampering. But like if you go to the St. Louis Blues, say hey, we want Alex Pietrangelo.
Or you could do a sign and trade.
Yeah, you say like, listen, if you guys can get Pietrangelo under contract, we'll trade for him.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's been done before where you're like, oh, Pietrangelo signed this contract with the Blues, quote unquote, and like we're just gonna trade you to wherever you want to go.
Yeah, and we'll just trade you, or the team that's trading for him. Like, again, I think that's what you said. Like the team, all right, Gary Bettman does not look.
He
good.
looks like trash right about now.
He looks like he's aged about 100 years.
I mean, I'm sure the stress of all this. I also think he's wearing way too much makeup, and the lighting is really, really harsh. Like, he almost looks like somebody put a poster eyes filter on him in Photoshop.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It looks terrible.
I'm sure the stress of the last like month has really been weighing on him.
Oh no, 100. Like I could 100%. Like there's so much money and everything at stake with this tournament. That's when it started. They didn't even know if it was gonna work after the first day.
So do you think that if the Wild get this first round pick, that they finally buy into the rebuild and just start trading away all these older guys?
Yeah, no, they don't buy into the rebuild, but they trade up. But they definitely think they're in a better position than they were. I think.
You don't think they start rebuilding?
I just don't think they want to. Especially after this year where they went 4 games with the Vancouver Canucks and played 4 competitive hockey games.
Do you think they should?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's not even a question. They need to call it quits. I mean, there's no reason to really prolong this the way they have. Because it's only going to be harder in the long run. If you do what Detroit did, which is extend the streak for the sake of the streak without extending the streak for the nature of being competitive, right? At some point, the Detroit Red Wings were just trying to hit that 25-year mark and break the record. And then you saw what happened after they broke the record. They kind of fell off a cliff. They had nothing.
They're really bad.
And does Minnesota really want to go that route and fall off a cliff and be really bad for really long? Because that's like a 6-7 year rebuild before they even start competing again.
Especially with the contracts that they have on that team.
Right. So I really think the important thing for them to do would be start rebuilding now, especially after you got a guy like Kevin Fiala who's only 22.
Do they actually have the ping pong balls in a briefcase?
Yep.
That is incredible.
The NHL's acting like this looks like a bank. Like
I want to see the other side of all those ping pong balls. Because I guarantee you, the other side of all of them just says Pittsburgh Penguins.
half of them say Pittsburgh Penguins, and the other half say Edmonton Oilers.
I think it's really funny that the NHL personally basically responded to everyone claiming that the draft was rigged after this. 'Cause they're like, we're going to do this really transparently. It's going to be, you're going to see the balls go in a machine. You're going to see Bettman take them out. You know what's going to be really funny? If he pulls Pittsburgh, the Rangers, or Edmonton, I guarantee you, like, you're going to see, like, in his eyes, he's going to be like, ah, crap. You're like, really? Like, they're going to think it's rigged again.
So I think this is really. I think honestly, what might be an ideal fit for Lafreniere, just a random thought, but like they're putting the Florida Panthers ball in, is the Florida Panthers.
Well, you would replace Trocheck that they traded away for no reason.
You replace Trocheck, and then you could let Evgeny Dadonov walk. You wouldn't want to have to pay him the $6.5 million that he's going to want, and you could pay Mike Hoffman. So then the top 6 rounds out pretty nicely. You have that top line you'd have Lafreniere, Barkov, Huberdeau, Hoffman, Haula, and then Frank Vetrano maybe, who's not like great, but Frank Vetrano can play there. Or even Owen Tippett might take a big step into that top 6. And then I think, in my opinion, that makes Florida. I mean, it should, in theory, make Florida a better team, but we really don't know what's going on in Florida because they should have been a better team this year than they were.
I think Florida's defense needs help.
Well, yeah, outside of
Aaron Ekblad, it's really not that impressive. I mean, I think
Mike Matheson's pretty good.
I think that he accidentally just dropped it in before showing there you go, buddy. I think it's important that, they signed a guy like Anton Strawman, like a really nice veteran defenseman. But, I mean, still, like, it clearly showed this year that they need help scoring depth-wise. They can't just rely on the big line anymore. It can't just be Barkov, Huberdeau, and Evgeny Dadonov. They can't just rely on the top line. Because it showed against the Islanders when they scored 3 goals 5-on-5. You can't just have one line going. But I think the other thing is, like, they really need help defensively because whatever scheme that they're playing just isn't working.
No. And I think, Joel Quenneville is probably the best coach in hockey. So if anyone's going to figure it out, it's going to be him. But he needs personnel to work with.
He also just might need to shift the way he's coaching this team because he had the benefit of having not only just an elite offense in Chicago, but like a sneaky good defense when he had Duncan Keith, Brent Seabrook, Nick Leddy,
Nicholas
Hjalmarsson. So, like, even though the focal point of the Chicago Blackhawks was their offense, their defense more than held their own.
Oh, I mean, yeah, Johnny Oduya, like, that was a good team.
The issue with the Panthers is that the offense holds their own, but that defense is not good enough.
Yeah.
So, like, Quenneville could kind of leave the Chicago defense to do what they had to do, and they were good enough to do it. But, like, this Florida Panthers defense needs something. It needs a piece or two.
He's literally got the button in his hand to turn the machine on.
Oh, baby. I thought it just broke for a second. I was like,
Could
that
you
is
imagine?
so on par with the NHL. All right, so we're going to see where Alexis Lafreniere is going to go. I'm nervous, and I'm not even a fan of any of these teams. I'm just really excited to see where he's going to go. And then we could talk about, do whatever team comes up, like, do you take Lafreniere? I mean, some of these are going to be obvious. Like, if you're the Wild, like, yeah, you're going to take Lafreniere. Like, you're not stupid, but...
Chuck Fletcher is smart enough to know. Like, he... Again, like I said, after adding Kevin Fiala at the deadline, like, he'd be stupid to not want to add another scoring winger to play with Kevin Fiala.
This guy looks dead inside.
He's looking for, like, very specific, it's in.
Oh!
The New York Rangers just got...
So the New York Rangers are now in possession of the number 1 overall pick in the 2020 NHL entry draft.
What just happened?
Look at Bettman's face.
This is the first overall pick in New York Rangers franchise history. The highest they drafted outside of Capo Caco, was Brad Park, 2nd overall in 1966. Oh my God! What just happened? I'm both excited and terrified. I got it. All right, hang on. What?
So now the question becomes: Are you taking the pick? I mean, obviously, the Rangers have a fantastic offense this year. You have Artemi Panarin, you have Mika Zibanejad, you have Ryan Strome.
Jeff Gordon is a magician. I don't know how he managed to pull this off, but he did.
You have Pavel Buchnevich still. You still have Vitaly Kravtsov, who's supposed to come over.
He's back. He's playing in the AHL. So
you have forwards, and you have forwards that are also expendable. Though the question is, do you want to just let a guy like Ryan Strome walk?
You could trade a guy like Pavel Buchnevich, in theory, right? Because then you could use him to get a defenseman. You could trade Buchnevich, and maybe we have 2 first-round picks. You could trade him and maybe the 10th or 11th overall pick for a defenseman to a team like Anaheim. Still, you might still be able to pull off the Hampus Lindholm trade we had talked about for like the 10th overall pick and a guy like Pavel Buchnevich.
So, if you're Jeff Gorton, are you drafting Lafreniere?
I think so. I honestly, I think so. I just think, like, you're not wrong with whatever way you're thinking about this, right? Because, like, adding an elite scoring winger or trading the pick, like, there's something to be said for both camps, right? Like, obviously, adding Lafreniere to a team that already includes Artemi Panarin and Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider and young guys like Vitaly Kravtsov, Filip Chytil, like, I'm still just absolutely stunned. Like, I'm not going to lie.
I'm sure Gary Bettman's not too happy right about now.
I'm very rarely at a loss for words, and like I really don't know what to say. Like as a fan of this team, I really don't know. Like that's incredible. Like I don't. Not only did we get Capo Caco last year, who again touted as like the best one of the best forwards in the draft, and now you get. Do you think the Rangers do something wild, like absolutely buck wild, and draft a guy like Tim Stützle?
No. If you have the first pick, you're either drafting Lafreniere or you're trading down. And as an outside observer, someone who's not a fan of the team, I genuinely think the Rangers' best interest might be to trade down. I think a perfect world for the New York Rangers is you trade down to 6th with the Anaheim Ducks, you'd get Hampus Lindholm out of that trade, and you draft Jamie Drysdale. Now the question then becomes, does Rangers management actually think certain guys are as good as they are, or that their numbers are being inflated? Like, do you think Ryan Strome is a legitimate player in this league, or do you think that his breakout season is because he was playing with one of the best players in the league? Now, if your answer to that is no, I don't think Ryan Strome's as good as they're saying he is, you can let Ryan Strome walk. You take Lafreniere, and he walks onto that second line. It makes certain players expendable, but then the other thing is now you really have to consider certain things. Vitaly Kravtsov is supposed to play for them next year. He's probably going to want to play in top 6 minutes, and
I think Kravtsov would be okay with playing on the third line for the because he hasn't really played in North America. He hasn't earned his stripes, right? Like, he hasn't gone out there and he hasn't proven that he's a top 6 guy. But I think the worst case that happens, right, is you trade for a guy like, you don't trade, you draft Lafreniere, right? And then if Kravtsov has a breakout year and turns out to be like the real deal, like the Rangers think he's going to be, you can trade a guy like Buchnevich or even Chris Kreider, really. You could trade, because Lafreniere's big and he plays a big game. So, I don't know. I just think Jeff Gordon's got a lot of thinking to do, because I'm glad he's in that seat and I'm not, because I have no idea what I'd do.
So I was just writing down like some of the names for the Rangers that could be in the top 6 next year. And I have 8 names written down. You have, obviously, Mika, Panarin, and Kreider are guaranteed locked-in top 6 players. Whether or not they're in the first or second line, guaranteed locked-in top 6. Then you have Buchnevich, Strome, Kakko, Hedl, and Kravtsov.
Ooh.
So you have a lot of young guys that could play in the top 6. Now, of course, somebody like Buchnevich is no stranger to playing on the third line. He was on the third line for parts of last year. I think if Strome is told he's going to be on the third line, he's probably going to walk. I don't think he'd sign to play third line winger.
Well,
with
the thing is,
Rangers.
Lafreniere isn't a center iceman; he's a winger. So,
well, I'm saying, like, the thing is with Strome though, like,
well, yeah. Well, if Hedl manages to take this job from him, is kind of the issue. Like, you don't know what's going to happen with Philip Hedl.
Right, and you could play Kakko on the third line, give him some more time to develop. But after how good he looked specifically in the play-in rounds and their exhibition game, of course it's going to come down to how does he look on the ice next year in the regular season, because of course he struggled this year, like, you know.
But again, now he gets to go home back to Finland and continue working out, which had such a clear benefit for him and the break. So he might who knows, he might come back next year and score 40 goals. You don't really know.
So really the point is that there's 8 players here. I would say there's 4 guys that have to play in the top 6 if they're on a team, which is Mika, Panarin, Kreider, and Strome.
Right.
Assuming Strome signs. Other than that, you have 2 open wingers for 4 other guys who could be on the top 6, could also play on the third line. There's a lot of options there. And I think ultimately the question is, do you think that Lafreniere is better than any of the other options that you have at that position? Because that's really what it comes down to.
I mean, I think the answer is yeah. I mean, I think Lafreniere is an immediate upgrade over a guy like Pavel Buchnevich or even Ryan Strome to a degree, because he's going to put up way more points than those guys are.
Well, is he? I mean, the thing is, you have to take into account, you know, granted Jack Hughes is playing on a kind of a bad team, and granted Kakko was coming over from Finland, but these were also guys that were supposed to make immediate impacts, and they struggled. And again, the Rangers are in a fortunate position where they're not trying to go for the Stanley Cup next year. Right. So they can afford to have Lafreniere struggle. If he comes over and puts up only 30 points, that's not that big a deal. You know, you're still in a good spot.
I still think this is like the strangest position for the Rangers to be in, because they're not rebuilding anymore. For all intents and purposes, they're moving into like the phase where they're starting to be a playoff team, right?
The rebuild ended as soon as
you signed Artemi
Panarin signs with New York Rangers.
Right.
My phone is blowing up right now.
So is mine. But like, it's just like, I wonder what Lafreniere's thinking. I wonder if he's excited, because in theory, like, in his mind, the first overall pick, he's been hyped up to be the first overall pick, and the New York Rangers just win it, right? So in his mind, he's like, oh, I'm going to New York. Do you think he starts preparing? Like, he's a Canadian kid, so like, is he ready for the spotlight of Manhattan? Is really the question. Is he ready to play on Broadway? I don't think he's going to shy away from the spotlight. I don't think it's going to be a problem for him, because like, he speaks the language. He's fluent in English. For all intents and purposes, he's like, it would be very easy.
He's a North American kid. It's different. It's not Kakko. As if he's like, you know, somebody like.
Well, it's like Kakko, or like Timothy Stützle would be a good example, because Timothy Stützle is German. He only speaks German. It's like,
yeah.
And I don't even think the spotlight. I don't think necessarily the spotlight would be the issue there either. It's not like the pressure would get to them. It's just like the actual like adjusting to life here would get them. So it's just an interesting prospect, because you could have 2 of the best young players in the NHL playing 9 blocks from Times Square on Broadway. You know, the biggest media market in the entire league.
if the Rangers take him, I won't be surprised if they decide not to trade the pick, if they just draft Lafreniere. The thing that gives me pause is obviously Lafreniere is a fantastic player. That being said, he's been told to be a shade under McDavid and Matthews type players, where he's not going to be franchise shifting, where McDavid basically took the Oilers on his back, right? Matthews basically ended the Toronto Maple Leafs rebuild.
Well, I think
he's more. I think that what they're saying is he's going to be like a McKinnon, right? Where he comes in, he's going to be effective, but it might take him a couple of years to really break out. Which, to be fair, like McKinnon, like you've been saying previously, up until like 3 years ago, he was only like a 60-point player.
Right. The thing is, I think the Rangers can afford to take that risk with him, just because you don't need, the Rangers. Let's be honest, the Rangers don't need to draft an Austin Matthews type player or a Connor McDavid right now. And obviously, you would want one, right? Who's not, but we have ours. We have Artemi Panarin, who is of the same caliber as a guy like Austin Matthews and Connor McDavid. Maybe not McDavid, but like in the realm, right? He's an S plus tier player, right? Where McDavid's like an S plus tier. Like he's the best player in the league, so like he's just above everybody else. But that being said, the Rangers don't need an instant franchise shifter or a guy that's going to come in and be of McDavid's ilk, because they have, Artemi Panarin, Mika Zibanejad. They have the guys that do those jobs already. And adding somebody that could put up maybe even as, if he is like McKinnon, a 60-point guy is nothing to shake your leg at in the NHL, especially if he grows into his own and becomes the 90, 100-point guy that Nathan McKinnon became.
It's the reason I bring up that he's not a McDavid or Matthews is just because if he was reported to be like that, this isn't even a question.
Yeah, no.
It doesn't matter. You're drafting Sidney Crosby. You're drafting Connor McDavid. You're drafting Austin Matthews. Like, that's not even a question, right? But because this draft is reported to be so deep this year, you could maybe move down to 6 and say, for example, Jamie Drysdale goes at 4 or 5. Like, you're probably still going to get Lucas Raymond, Timothy Stützle, Alexander Holtz. Like
good players. And the Rangers still have either the 10th or the 11th overall pick, whichever one's the lower. I don't remember, based on the Carolina trade. Mm-hmm. So you can end up with 2 top 10 draft picks. You could draft Matt.
Yeah, and see, the thing is, like,
I think there's a way to orchestrate it that you could hold on to this first overall pick and move that second pick, the lower of the two, and really try and maybe give up a piece off the roster that you're not really looking to move, but you can, like a guy like Buchnevich or something of that ilk, and manage to get Jamie Drysdale still.
I don't think Drysdale's going to be available at 10.
No, that's what I'm saying.
You have to trade up.
You can move that 10th overall pick and maybe get into a position like 5 or 6.
So the thing is, at that point, the Rangers would be trading up, right? So you'd have to put more on the table because you're asking a team to trade down. If it's a team like Ottawa who has 2 picks, might be a little bit easier, but they don't really have a defenseman that the Rangers are really looking for. Because they're not going to move Thomas Chabot, obviously.
I mean, who's left in LA?
Drew Doughty. I mean,
and LA's at second anyway, so it doesn't even really matter. But
I think, the Rangers could maybe orchestrate something with, and I keep going back to the Anaheim Ducks just because I think they are the perfect trade partner in this instance.
Look how happy Jeff Gordon is. Look at that smug smirk. Look at his face.
They could maybe the Rangers trade their 10th and like Buchnevich for like Hampus Lindholm, and maybe Anaheim's overall. Like, I don't know that Anaheim would trade their 6th overall, because Buch and a 10th for Hampus Lindholm and a 6th, I think that's a very heavily weighed in Anaheim's favor. Like, they'd need more from the Rangers back at that point.
Yeah.
Because you're essentially trading a top 2 defenseman and a 6th for a top middle 6 winger and the 10th, right?
Right.
They could do it, though. If the Rangers really wanted to be aggressive, they could maybe package their next year's first, but I don't know that Jeff Gordon wants to do that because he doesn't know where the team's going to be at next year.
True.
I don't think you can go wrong either way.
Wow, Scott Stevens. Big Bird absolutely leveling Gary Dornhoefer in Game 1 of the 1976 Stanley Cup Finals. Big hit.
I think if you take Lafreniere, you're doing the right thing. I think if you trade the first pick, trade down You do
You're still
Rangers
doing the right
first,
thing.
and if they really wanted to, you could do the Rangers first, and like maybe your second round pick for this year for Lindholm in the first, right? So you trade down to 6, but you get a top 2 defenseman. I don't really think you can go wrong either way. I know that we might disagree on what's the best.
Well, it's like I said before, like both camps are right, and there's credence to give both camps. Like both sides have something legitimate to like argue for. It's just, I mean, I guess it really depends on what management is thinking, and like neither one of us know what's going on inside the Rangers war room right now.
Yeah. The reason that I keep saying to do the trade is because not only do you get a top 2 defenseman now, but you also end up getting a prospect who's reported to be a top 2 defenseman in the future, which fills the holes that the Rangers have on defense.
I guess the real question then is, what does that do to the guys? Like, what does that look like on the Rangers back end? Because then that would kind of force their hand to buy out one of Mark Stahl or Henrik Lundqvist, right? I think Henrik Lundqvist is already kind of.
I think he's going to get bought out this year.
I think so. I think Mark Stahl might get bought out, but Mark Stahl also might just you just scratch him and carry him, like it's whatever.
Because if the Rangers buy out Henrik Lundqvist, and this is courtesy of our friends at Cap Friendly, so assuming their information is correct, Lundqvist's cap hit would be $5 million for this year, and I think it was $2.5 million for next year. So you're saving essentially $3.5 million this year, but you're paying $2.5 million next year because it goes 1 year beyond what his contract actually would have been.
I mean, the biggest issue really with the buyout is that the cap isn't moving. That they, because of COVID and the fact that they just stopped the season, the revenue obviously isn't there. So the league can't justify raising the salary cap. So we're stuck at $81.5 million for the next 2 years, which really is going to hamstring a lot of these teams, specifically the Rangers. Like that's a team that has a lot of big contracts already on the books that they're looking to get rid of from their previous competitive age. And they're going to be looking to sign new big contracts going forward because they have young players getting ready to make those steps and be competitive again.
I'm sure you're going to see a lot of bridge deals, I would have to imagine.
Yeah.
You take a 2-year contract, and when the cap goes up, we'll pay you. It's just interesting because there is that thought process where maybe you can draft Lafreniere, put him in your top 6, and then you don't have to pay Ryan Strome $5 million.
True.
And that saves a lot of money right there. Or you don't have to pay Buchnevich, even though he's not making that much, I don't think.
Well, his contract comes up next year, and he's probably going to ask for like 4 or 5, and it's...
Is it up this year or next year?
Next year.
So he's under contract through 2020-21.
Yeah, I think so. I believe so.
So you can trade him away now and save whatever amount of money. Lafreniere is going to get league maximum for rookie contract, so he's going to make $975,000.
And whatever performance bonuses he gets, or signing bonuses.
But luckily for the Rangers, it'll only count against the cap.
Yeah,
$975,000.
And James Dolan's pockets are deep, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Rangers are in a weird place, but I think they're in a very good place because they have options. This isn't like certain teams where it's like you're just going to take him, right?
Right. Well, the best place to be is the place where you have the most options. And, that's like you said, the Rangers are actually in a real... with this, the Rangers have put themselves in an incredible spot. I mean, they didn't do anything. But with this, the Rangers have been put in, honestly, probably one of the most unique... And it really is probably the most unique situation to be in right now because, you're... Both decisions are good decisions. It's just... What do you value more? Do the Rangers go the route of the Toronto Maple Leafs and just try to score their way out of jams? But the difference is the Rangers' defensive core is a little more capable, I think, in the long run than the Maple Leafs was.
In the long run, yes. I was going to say now probably not.
No, for now probably not. But
projection-wise, yes.
So, I don't know. It really, there really is just... It's a real interesting position to be in.
Yeah, I mean... I think that kind of just sums it up. I mean,
there's really not a lot to say.
There's 2 different camps here, and obviously,
I'm not particularly in one camp or the other. It's just
I'm in the trade the pick camp. Yeah, I think that was obvious.
I'm just in honestly, I'm just in sheer disbelief that the Rangers just won the first overall pick for the first time in their history.
This is going to be interesting. So we'll see.
How this shakes out.
What happens with Alexis Lafreniere. Obviously, as you guys know, the playoffs are starting on Tuesday. We're recording this on Monday. Hopefully, this will be going up tonight.
So we'll probably
try to get out another podcast maybe midweek
or the end of the week, maybe something like after there's been a couple of playoff games played,
just so we can talk about because we need to do our playoff predictions, obviously.
Yeah.
Which we might. I mean, we could honestly kind of do like a mini pod about that at some point, but
yeah,
we'll figure it out. The point is, there will be another episode this week about our playoff predictions.
Is that riff-raff?
We already put in our bracket, so it's not like we can call a sweep now, but then if they lose game one, like change it, right? Like the brackets are going to be locked in.
Right. I mean, like we did our bracket challenges.
Right. So stay tuned for another episode later this week.
Quick thought. Not really sure how we'd play this out, but maybe we do. I mean, we'd have to set it up tonight, but maybe we do a public lighting the lamp bracket challenge for any listeners out there who want to play along with us.
We do have the have the one set up already.
I mean, yeah, I made the one. It just has the password on it. So I guess if you listen to this and it's before playoffs start on Tuesday at noon, I think the first games are still Eastern Standard Time.
Because it gets locked after that.
So they really didn't give you a lot of time to do this, but I guess if you hear this and you've made it this far into the podcast and you would like to join our bracket challenge, I guess
it's called Lighting the Lamp.
Yeah.
We can tweet the direct link to it.
Yeah, or there's a password lock on it. So if one of you want to tweet at one of us, and we'll give you the password to play along with.
Yeah, you guys, my handle, it should be on Lighting the Lamp. If not, it's LBG_Rob. You can tweet at me. I think I have my DMs open. So if you want to DM me, I can give you the password. You just have to look online. So if you're interested in joining, just DM me. I'll link you the password. I'll link you the link
actual
to
bracket.
Our challenge and give you the password. Other than that, later on this week, we'll be doing playoff predictions. It'll have to be, unfortunately, in retrospect of a few games happening, but just of how fast everything's been progressing in the NHL.
We really don't have a lot of time to catch our breath.
The last game of one of the series was yesterday.
Playoffs start tomorrow.
Right, and the playoffs start tomorrow. So not a lot of time, but stay tuned. Later in the week, we'll be doing playoff predictions, and we will talk about... we're probably just going to... We'll go over our brackets, but since they're reseeding, it's going to be kind of weird this year. So probably at the start of every round, we'll just talk about the matchups and stuff like that. But so... Thank you guys for watching. Later on this week, stay tuned for playoff predictions. Congratulations to the New York Rangers for earning the first overall pick in the 2020 NHL entry draft. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys again